Well, good evening, everyone. And I think you all know my name is Tim Hitchens. I'm the president of the college. And welcome to those of you here in this glorious auditorium. But we also have people in the Buttery, we have people in the cafe, and we have people online watching us today. So welcome to all of you. We are going to hear a lecture by Michael Ignatieff today. And you may know Michael is a Canadian historian, university professor, writer, and a former politician. After completing a doctorate at Harvard and teaching history at the University of British Columbia, he was awarded a senior research fellowship at King's College, Cambridge, co-directing a project on the origins of classical economic theory. He left academic life in 1984 to work as a freelance writer and journalist in London, making television documentaries for the BBC and writing a column for The Observer. In 2000, he returned to academic life with an appointment as director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. In 2005, he then left the Kennedy School to enter Canadian politics. And between 2006 and 2011, he served as an MP in the Parliament of Canada, and then as leader of the Liberal Party of Canada and leader of the official opposition. He is a member of the Privy Council and a recipient of the Order of Canada. After leaving politics, he returned to academic life, serving as Centennial Chair at the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs in New York, and Chair of Press, Politics and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Between 2016 and 2021, he was the rector and president of Central European University in Budapest, leading the university to Vienna after its expulsion by Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. And he's currently a professor of history at CEU in Vienna, Austria. I could list all of the books he's published and all of the receipts of honors he's received, but I think I'll end it there and invite you, Michael, to take the stand.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. We've had a wonderful day, and I've been part of it. And I have a speaker's problem, which is that some of you in this audience were lucky enough to hear Hermione Lee before me. And what do you do after that? Because she, in a brilliant stroke, was talking about home and the role of houses and homes in biography. And she had the brilliant idea of having them play Elvis Presley singing Home. I mean, you just can't, what do you do after that? You know? So there you go. I will be, because I'm Canadian, earnest, humorless, and dreary for 25 minutes. And my subject is Isaiah Berlin and the making of a liberal institution. I was his biographer, and this place is in some sense bears his imprint in every way. On happy days in our lives and in the lives of institutions, and this is a happy day in Wolfson's life, our happiness inspires a form of magical thinking. We begin to believe the dead can see us, that they're watching, sharing our delight. And this afternoon, we hope one man in particular is feeling as we do, since more than anyone else he made this day possible. Now, he would surely regard mystical communion with the dead as a piece of arrant sentimentality. But I think we should be allowed to go on believing that he's up there somewhere smiling down upon us right now with a benevolent, ironic, and playful look on his face. For what he hoped for, to build an institution that would last, has happened. And a man is lucky indeed to have a claim to such a posterity. And thanks to him, we're lucky too. Because we can celebrate the college's past 50 years, there's going to be a ceremony like this in a century from now, and another one in a century after that, into any future we can imagine. And if any future is possible for any of us at all, there will be a Wolfson College in it. Even the most unsentimental individualists among us care about institutions because they root us in the past, they connect us to the departed, and they give us hope that these buildings and the culture that has arisen within them will carry our values into the future. Institutions are the vessels that give shape and meaning to our own lives and help us to make sense of time itself. A college's buildings, gardens, rooms, halls, portraits and plaques on the walls, down to the stones underfoot that wear the imprint of footfalls past, that Berlin Wall we pass on the way to meals, all this, by linking us to what came before, give us hope that others will carry what we cared about into time future, no matter how stormy and uncertain that future may turn out to be. Now, all enduring institutions aspire to transmit continuity, but this isn't any institution, and the values it hopes to transmit to the future are distinctly its own. It had an inimitable founder, and so it's an inimitable institution. It's different things to different people, but all would describe it, I think, as liberal in the ancient, untrammeled meaning of that very trammeled word. It means generous, open-hearted, curious, welcoming. And indeed, of the great liberal philosophers, John Stuart Mill, John Rawls, Judith Shklar, Isaiah Berlin is the only one to have created an institution shaped in the image of his liberal convictions. And the college's existence since 1974 has been an exploration and a vindication of the possibility of liberalism as a way of life. And in the words of Hermione Lee, your former president here, a liberal place means, quote, a treasured atmosphere, an ethos of friendly openness, family orientation, international range, and democratic egalitarianism. Now, liberalism is rarely described as an ethos, as a feeling, as a practice of egalitarian freedom. But that actually captures what a liberal like me actually cares about better than talk of liberalism as a bundle of rights balancing the authority of an enabling state. And indeed, as liberal democracy itself comes under strain, it's ever more important to defend liberalism not just as a politics, but as a way of life. For the politics is unlikely to survive if the way of life gives way. Now, you've done me the honor of inviting me to speak on this occasion, so I'm going to use my time to share some thoughts about these values and then polemically address some of the challenges, some of which he anticipated and some of which are new to our times, that these values face today. But first of all, why did Berlin make the creation of a new institution the central purpose of his life between the ages of 56 and 66? He certainly didn't need to. At that moment, he stood at the pinnacle of his fame. Fellow of All Souls, Knight of the Realm, Chichely Professor of Social and Political Theory. But as any moment at the pinnacle is apt to do, he seems to have stopped and asked himself how he got there and to what he owed his ascent. He could see that he owed nearly everything to the Oxford College system. And it was this sense of debt that made him say in a letter to Morris Bowra, who thought his commitment to Wolfson was a piece of madness, Quote, some ancient deposit of social conscience, Berlin wrote, was roused in him in 1965 when scientists who had no place in the Oxbridge College system asked him to take on the leadership of what was then called the Iffley and St. Cross colleges. And in leading this motley group, they were motley but very distinguished, he saw an opportunity to thank Oxford, to thank it for what it had enabled him to become. Because from the moment he arrived in England, a Jewish refugee age 11 from Lenin's Russia, English institutions had taken him in, given him a new belonging. St. Paul's School, then Corpus Christi College, then New College, then All Souls. And he was the first Jew elected to that pinnacle of Oxford privilege at the age of 23. His story places him among the luminaries whom England gave refuge to from war and persecution. Think Gombrich, think Popper, Wittgenstein, Gellner, Deutscher, Plamenatz, Pulitzer, Schenck, Namier, Lauterpacht. An incredible record. Outsiders all, who became insiders. Foreigners with accents and pasts, who became pillars of English intellectual life. And these exiles and emigres of Berlin's generation wove Englishness into the skein of their identity in a braiding made possible by free institutions. And so one thing you want to say about a liberal institution is that it integrates newcomers without forcing them to assimilate, without requiring them to abandon the ties of race and class, nationality and ethnicity that made them who they are. The other thing you want to say is that free institutions don't require newcomers to shut up, to silence their convictions. Berlin was standing in All Souls Common Room after lunch in the mid-1930s when a German visitor was heard to remark that he thought Hitler's territorial demands in Europe were reasonable, quote unquote. From the back of the common room came a growl, Wir Juden und die anderen Farbigen denken anders. We Jews and other colored peoples think otherwise. This was Louis Namier, the Polish-born historian of 18th century England, using his place as an insider to speak on behalf of outsiders, just as Berlin himself was to do so often. So a liberal institution, a third thing to say, never forgets those outside its walls and welcomes insiders when they come in, asks them to fit in, but does not require them to conform, to shave off their beards, remove skull caps or hijabs or headscarves, or say the grace with the others. Why? Because a liberal institution welcomes plural identities, because we all have plural identities, and we need a place of freedom in which we can reconcile the competing claims on all of us. Or, as Isaiah put it in better words than mine, a college should be, quote, a society which is animated by the desire to allow the gifts and potentialities of individuals to develop as freely and generously as is practicable, and the variety of temperaments to spill over in all kinds of imaginative ways. It should be a society anxious to knock down as many walls as possible between individuals or groups and educate men and women to be approachable, open, and above all, unafraid of one another. So for Berlin, Wolfson was to embody in miniature what a liberal life should be writ large. A community of free men and women who are unafraid. Unafraid of each other, unafraid of the stranger at their door, unafraid of the future. A community, in his words, quote, open, humane, tolerant, optimistic, with an inner vitality and a loose kind of solidarity and widespread faith in the unlimited possibilities of a satisfactory common and individual life. To use the distinction he made famous, a college should give its members freedom from conformity, from rules that make no sense, freedom from dullness, from obedience without any point, and empower and enable freedom to become yourself, to become whom you dimly sense you could be, to wear your suits or sandals, to wear your trousers rolled or unrolled, to be with who you love, whoever they are, to combine your various selves in any of the ways that work for you, provided only that you give the institution that makes it all possible your allegiance. Not a blind allegiance, not an uncritical allegiance, a critical belonging instead, and ultimately, a willingness to put the good of the place above your own interests. Loyalty to an institution, he thought, should be an expression of gratitude for allowing you to realize the possibilities within you, combined with a commitment to join in the trials and tribulations of self-government. This belief that free, self-governing institutions are essential, definitive of a good society, is a part of the liberal heritage that needs some reviving these days. There are some progressive young people whom I teach in my classrooms who've been graduating in the last couple of weeks who seem to see the institutions simply as stage sets on which to perform coming-of-age rituals of political virtue signaling. Graduation ceremonies in the UK and the United States and in my own university, which were meant to be a celebration of institutional belonging, have been hijacked by students seeking to turn them into a spectacle of their own beliefs. The problem is not their beliefs. The problem is their absence of institutional loyalty. These spectacles open the university to attack as bastions of privilege and covens of self-righteousness, and so assailed from the left and the right, liberals who defend institutions have been forced into a defensive crouch. And it's time to get out of the crouch and stand up straight again. Recovering pride in these institutions and regaining the toughness to defend them means recovering why liberals think they matter in the first place. It would mean remembering that in liberal thought, there always was a middle term, les corps intermédiaires, as Montesquieu called them, between the individual and the state. This is the place for free self-governing institutions, between the individual and the state. The French revolutionary Jacobins abolished churches, corporations, collegial groups, leaving the individual naked before the power of the state and its guillotine. Benjamin Constant and Alexis de Tocqueville rejected the chilling Republican idea that a citizen could be free only if they were equal before the laws of an overpowering state. Isaiah Berlin is in this tradition. He carried this post-revolutionary tradition of the mid-19th century into the 20th century. Now, he supported the post-1945 welfare state, but he thought it was dangerous for socialists and social democrats to look to the state for all an individual's rights and entitlements. In addition, they needed the sheltering democracy of self-governing institutions, trade unions, professional associations, colleges, schools, universities, clubs. These institutions were critical sources of freedom, identity, and self-development. And today, liberals need to defend self-governing institutions like this one, not as islands of corporate privilege, not as protective covens for politically correct opinion, but as the protective tissue between citizen and the state that safeguards everyone, inside the university and outside it, against the aggrandizing ambitions of authoritarian populists, dictators, and tyrants of all stripes and convictions. There was a Burkean conservative side to Berlin's belief in life's little platoons, the institutions that give an individual purpose and belonging. He was a refugee from revolution himself, and so he knew it's much easier to tear down institutions than pass them on to the next generation. He'd lived in All Souls, after all, since 1932, and he knew what institutional belonging actually meant. It meant that acknowledging nod by a colleague in the corridor, the whispered gossip in a common room, the laughter at in-jokes held in common, and the invaluable but casual way that scholars share their knowledge. If you think about hedgehogs and foxes, Berlin's famous distinction that he made definitional of human types in a famous essay on Tolstoy that he wrote in 1951, that all began its life in a college dinner, when undergraduates said he just read something interesting in a Greek text. And his eye went, boom, there's my next article. And that's how intellectual life at its best works, when institutions are doing what they should do. But unlike Burke, unlike conservatives of his generation like Michael Oakeshott, Berlin believed freedom couldn't be freedom without equality. In 1965, he wrote, "Arbitrary inequality is an abominable thing." And the inequality that nettled him, caused him to leave All Souls after 35 years, was the inequality between those academics with university appointments who had college membership and belonging, and those graduate students and scientists in faculty, the non-dons, who did not. Wolfson's raison d'etre, as I'm sure you know, was to remedy the failure of the existing college system to incorporate graduate education, and above all, in the natural sciences. Berlin had been in America since 1949, on and off, and he realized earlier than most that Oxford had become the prisoner of its own prestige. Oxford was drifting into mediocrity and decline, falling behind the American research-intensive university, because it was trapped by a centuries-old college system based in undergraduate supervisions. The Wolfson he created took down the barriers that held back women, barred scientists and scholars from minority subjects from the high table of Oxford's established colleges, and consigned graduate students to second-class status. The innovations that Berlin and his team introduced, no high table, a single common room, a governing body at which members had a voice, it stood for equality between men and women, equality between scientists and non-scientists, equality between professorial fellows and graduate students, and with Aline Berlin's support in introducing a creche for young families, it meant equality between those with children and those without. Now, equality is a value, of course, but in an academic institution, it has to be reconciled with excellence, and that is no easy matter. While everyone must be accorded equal respect, those who excel deserve reward and acknowledgement. And institutions regularly fail to get this balance right, and they end up giving up on excellence for the sake of a quiet life. Berlin watched, increasingly disillusioned, as All Souls, his home since 1932, turned down appointments by a brilliant foreign logician and a formidable historian of Italy, because All Souls had lost an appetite for excellence and preferred to remain a male-only supper club. Better a first-class research institute than a bad club, Berlin believed. And the refusal of All Souls to open up to women, to share its wealth with other colleges, to partner with St. Anthony's to support graduate education, all this betrayal of excellence helped to precipitate his decision to throw in his lot with the men and women, Cecilia Dick, Frank Jessup, Michael Brock, and others whom we're also celebrating today, who created Wolfson. And by the end of Berlin's term in office, the college boasted a roster of fellows whom even the sharpest critic of its egalitarian tendencies had to admit met every criterion of excellence. So, my friends, these are the values that we celebrate today and commit to defend: academic excellence, democratic equality, freedom from arbitrary rules, freedom to become who you believe you can be, welcome to outsiders, questioning loyalty to the institution, and above all, a commitment to maintain these values as values, not as dogma, but as an ethos of generosity and openness of mind and heart. Now, the idea that liberalism is not a dogma, but a particular way of living and being together, an ideal of egalitarian sociability, this isn't a popular idea. To think of it this way seems privileged and elitist. Defending the conviviality and common purpose we enjoy within these walls makes us a little uneasy. Defending the inside against the outside also seems like a losing game at a time when outside our walls there is clamor, injustice, wickedness, and folly. Against these evils, we're all supposed to be armored with conviction. Without convictions, we're told, we lack a firm moral identity. Since we are in the battle of our lives against fanaticism, racism, aggression, and populist resentment, we must be armored, suited up. Our loins must be girded. We must be ready for a fight, with convictions at the ready, scornful, determined to take no prisoners, to defend what we value above all, including this great institution. But our founder had lived through earlier episodes of partisan ideological conflict in the 1930s and the 1960s. And he was skeptical above all about our longing for conviction, for certainty, for the moralizing identity it confers on us all. He never believed, and this is a defining liberal characteristic, that there are political solutions to every problem, or that every problem even has a solution in all cases. Tragedy haunts our boldest hopes. Some of our deepest needs in life cannot be ours by right. Love, for example, to name but one. To this reluctance to believe that everything is or must be political, he added an acute sense of the dangers of righteous polarization. He's commonly called a Cold War liberal. But when an American magazine once asked him for a declaration of liberal beliefs to counter the Soviet threat, he replied he thought we needed less conviction, not more. More humility, more uncertainty about the truth of our beliefs, not less. He liked to quote Talleyrand's remark, "Surtout, messieurs, pas trop de zèle." Now this is hardly a rallying cry in partisan times, but I think it's a cry we need to hear. We need a defense of the liberal values of moderation and humility more than ever, for without them, institutions like this easily fracture into warring camps, each convinced they have a monopoly on virtue and truth, easily persuaded to think of their colleagues who used to be friends as enemies. His warning, as relevant today as it was 50 years ago, is that the chief risk to liberal institutions comes not from without, but from within, when we allow the politics of conviction to run roughshod over the preserving liberal virtues of comity, civility, modesty, and humility. He gave a decade of his rich and favored life to this place, and this place gave back much to him. The opportunity to create, to lead, to prove himself capable of practical business, and the time to write Vico and Herder, the lecture on Turgenev, and much more. Wolfson's creation enabled him to meet a young graduate student called Henry Hardy, who's here somewhere down there. Henry's editorial labors over 40 years have done much to keep Berlin's writing before the public. And thanks to Henry's work, to the affection for him that I felt all day, thanks to the institution's steady growth under fine leadership since his time, his legacy is in robust health, and the college's future is bright. And in parlous times, these are achievements to be proud of. So let us surrender to magical thinking for just one moment and imagine him smiling down at us, sardonic, amused, with a look of mischief on his face. Thank you.
Well, a very, very warm thank you, Michael, for those wonderful words. Thank you to Michael, but to everyone who has made today possible. Somebody earlier on said, this has been so much fun, we must do it more often. I'd like to leave a little while before doing it again. But thank you to Hermione, who made a wonderful speech, Alan and Ian, who spoke about, I'm trying to see where Alan and Ian are, but who spoke wonderfully about the people and the fabric of this place and the families of those who helped create this wonderful, extraordinary location. Thank you to Walter Sawyer and Chris Licence. Thank you to all the students and fellows who've made today possible. You've helped us celebrate 50 years since the college moved to these extraordinary grounds on the River Cherwell. We've had volunteers and staff who've been making things happen. I'd like to say a warm thanks to them, and also to the Chancellor, who towards the very end of his time as Chancellor has been generous enough to come and join us today. So thank you very much, Chris. But our warmest thanks must be for those who originally imagined this college, who then designed it and who set its culture. And it's a culture which 50 years on and more has continued. It was one of the most striking things when I arrived here 6 years ago, that there was a very real culture that came from the 1960s, that had been passed down from person to person in a kind of osmosis that I couldn't explain. And part of it comes from the force of character of Isaiah himself, but a lot of it comes from the force of character of the people in this room, so I'm very grateful to you all. One part of Michael's speech particularly, I think, bears repeating. Isaiah had lived through partisan ideological conflict in the 30s and 60s, and he was skeptical of our longing for conviction, for certainty, for the moralizing identity it confers on us all. He thought we needed less conviction, not more humility, more uncertainty about the truth of our beliefs, and not less. And I think those are words which resound extremely clearly with the challenges that we all face in universities in the UK and around the world at the moment. So, happy birthday, Wolfson. Thank you all for joining the party. And as with all the very best birthday parties, there are goodie bags waiting for you as you depart at the end. So thank you very much indeed for your joining us.